Hey everybody, Kit Merker here for the Beyond Seattle SRE Meetup in December. Welcome everybody. We got an awesome lineup today and I'm really excited about it, and nice to see so many familiar faces. Two great speakers I'm really excited about tonight, but we'll get into it. Just to introduce myself, I work at a company called Noble 9. We're focused on service level objectives, and so if you're doing SLOs, you want to talk about it, hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn, happy to chat. I have a couple colleagues lurking around here somewhere too. As always, you can find videos of previous meetups on our Noble 9 YouTube page. You may even be watching this video right now on YouTube, so think about that for a second. And you'll be able to find this video there as well. So make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to thank our co-organizers who are all here on the screen, and a great group of people who help us figure out content ideas and find speakers and promote the event, and are really kind of embracing and turning this this little community, now 450 people, it's actually grown quite a bit, turning it into something really really cool and unique. So thank you to all of them, and some of them are around. If you don't see them here, you'll see them in the Slack, and if you have ideas, you want to speak, you want to participate, feel free to reach out to any of them, and we'll see what we can do. Also, we have a new Slack channel or Slack group for the Beyond Seattle SRE Meetup, and it's been, I will have to say, really fun having it, and being able to connect with people directly. I've really enjoyed it, and feel free to create new channels and to participate there and join up. We have a jobs channel in there, I'll remind everybody too. So if you're looking for a job, or you've got a job you'd like to post, feel free to post it in that group. But come on in, say hi in general, and we'll get to know you. Here's the agenda for today. So Florian is joining us from, he works at Dell, and he's joining us from France. So we're going to let him go first, and we're going to let him go early. And he'll take questions directly after his talk, because I think he's probably going to fall asleep toward the end of that and may or may not stay for breakout rooms. But really a cool, very technical talk he's going to be giving. I got to see a little preview of it before, and it's pretty cool. Then we'll do our normal breakout rooms for about 15 minutes. I think the timing on there might be wrong, but we're going to do 15-minute breakouts, and we have a little fun new way we're doing that this time. Stay tuned. And then Layla, who is a long-term friend of mine, many years, and she's going to be talking about how to kind of progress your career ladder. Advice on being advised, I think, is a really cool concept. And then we'll make a few announcements, do our Q&A, and say goodbye. That's the plan. So we'll try to stick to it. Here we go. So without further ado, Florian, I'll pass it over to you, and you can go ahead and give your talk.
Thank you, Kit. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Try again.
Okay. Slack.
Yeah, we see your slide.
All right. Okay, sounds good. So I'm Florian, based in France. Last time I was in Seattle was the year the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, so I let the fan do the math. Basically, I work for the product management team of what we name storage enablers. So it's everything to automate and consume storage. So it goes with Ansible, VRO plugin, SDK, APIs, and obviously Kubernetes driver, how to consume Dell storage from Kubernetes in an easier and automated manner. So I've been working on that for a year and a half now, and there's been lots of astonishment, quirks, and fun with that. Just few concepts about Kubernetes. When you start to play with this stateful app, there are a bunch of objects that you need to know and deal with: storage classes, volume claims, snapshots, etc., etc. The game changer for vendors like us, Dell, was the introduction of the CSI specification. CSI stands for Container Storage Interface. It's pretty much like when you install your Kubernetes, you have to pick your container runtime, CRI, and your network, on what network basically you will get your container communication. So with the CSI spec, and then the driver implemented back then, it enables you to really just through Kubernetes directive, hey, I need a persistent volume claim on dense storage to do everything. Create the volume, expose it to your pod, delete it, take a snapshot, increase it, etc., etc. So that specification is really a way for vendors to expose their hardware and give also some options that you may not have when you are running in-tree drivers. So one of the very first thing I did 1 year ago was to create my stateful lab and shut down a node of my cluster to see how it goes. So just a quick pull here with that question. So you can take your cell phone, there is a QR code. And the question is, do you know what's going to happen when you shut down a node with a stateful pod, with a stateful set? 3 options. Either it's going to be rescheduled automatically, everything is great. It can be rescheduled, but you have something to do, or nothing's happened. So if you people can just vote. So we have few voters now. Come on, QR code. So we have 3 voters for. I see we are 16, so I'll wait till, yeah, at least 8 people. Okay, so you know your Kubernetes. Indeed, basically when a node goes down, just like Cypress Hill said, you better be ready. So in this short video, I have a Kubernetes cluster on OpenShift, but works also with Kubernetes Vanilla. Basically, I'm shutting down my VM. I have my stateful app, and basically nothing's happened. The pod will be stuck into terminating mode. The reason for that is Kubernetes cannot decide if the failure is due to a kubelet failure, a not real hardware failure, or network partitioning. And basically, since there can be some active workload writing data, in case kubelet died, and then I still have my stateful set injecting data, Kubernetes will do nothing. So it's really up to you, the sysadmin, the SRE, to decide when to move it. So yeah, pretty rough for a fancy cluster solution. So few of my customers implemented different solution. What you can do is use off-the-shelf solution, open solution. There is 2 products touched a bit with. One is the node problem detector and Drano solution, and the other one is a software tool named Poison Pill. Both of these solutions are basically dealing with node fencing. So just like with the good old clustering technology, when you think a node is in bad shape, you can just kill it and make sure it's dead, so you can reschedule your solution, your application into some other place. So the node problem detector is something that comes with the GKE by default, the Google Kubernetes Engine. The Poison Pill solution is something that is really advertised and published by Red Hat OpenShift. It heavily relies on OpenShift custom resource definition, the machine configuration, and things like that. The biggest problem here is basically, since it's node fencing, killing the node, you are going to impact every workload that runs on your node. So these 2 solutions were not a super great fit for some of my customers, and one in particular. So what I helped him with was to implement something 100% custom, a tool that we name PodFence, which is about monitoring, really designed for his application. The guy is running his application on the managed Kubernetes, so he cannot really decide to shut down a node or paint a node or move it. So we have this PodFence to really take care of the application, and instead of fencing the node, basically we will fence the pod. So there is some mechanisms to make sure that the application is up or down, and most of the work is really about cleaning up the object, the volume attachment, to make sure that once you have a volume created somewhere attached to a particular node which you think is dead, we will detach it and reattach it to the other place. So the big advantage for him was this solution only deals with his application, and he won't have to kill the data. The problem we faced are mostly related to race conditions. You know, sometimes shutting down a database can take minutes, and you have to be very careful in the way you are rescheduling your stateful app. The second solution we came up with at Dell is something that we named Podman. And here, basically, the idea is to collect and gather the storage array metrics to feed Kubernetes scheduler so we can take better decisions. Basically, when you have kubelet down and your container still running, or network partitioning, since we have our container run across the cluster, we still are able to connect to the backend array and see there is IO and see the volume status. So let's say kubelet died, I still have my container running. Thanks to the API of the array, I can know that, hey, it's probably a bad idea to reschedule this pod because I can see active IOs on it. Or I can see that the LAN is still mounted. The other way around, the node goes down, it's flagged as not ready. And in the meantime, I see from the array side that nothing happens on this volume, so we can safely reschedule it. What's interesting with that solution is, again, we can decide to apply it to only the application we are dealing with. Once we are going through this heuristic and analysis, it goes super fast to move your application and kickstart it. We also implemented some solution to isolate pod zombies and make sure there is no data corruption, and we designed it so it's extensible. The cons, not so cool thing is we are still actively developing that solution, which is going to be out in the next quarter. So far, it's centric in our technologies, but like I said, it's designed to be extensible. So we can definitely think about other solution where you feed the IOPS from the storage controller, so you can again reschedule it better. Short pause. Yes, so this here, I wanted to discuss a bit about how you are going to measure the reliability and resiliency of your applications. So you must know that better than I do, but from the Google's SRE book, we have these golden signal like capacity, latency, etc., etc. But it's not everybody is Google, so it's not super easy to rely on this sometimes. From the market, there is zillion of solutions, from open source to private vendors and proprietary software. Like there is solutions all over the place. From what I saw in the field, Prometheus and Grafana are basically everywhere, but it's probably not enough to just measure the resiliency of your app. And so from my experience, and if I can give some opinion on that, Kubernetes is super open and cool with a few things. So for every of your pods, you can introduce a live probe to make sure it's healthy. And there is also a mechanism to expose your business transaction. So instead of focusing on something like, I don't know, HTTP call or something like that, you can measure a number of transactions, expose it through the Kubernetes custom metric API and measure like that. So it's really like customer centric and really related to your use cases. Okay, 10 minutes already. I think I'll be in time. The second kind of astonishment or surprise I got was with file systems with NFS, network file system, and file ownership. So again, very short poll for you. Did you ever use the FS group tag from Kubernetes pod definition? Yes, no, yes with NFS? What's your experience with that? No? Okay, I agree. Security sucks. Let's not use that. Few more people, please. Let's reach 3, 4. Okay, one more. No. Okay, so nobody uses it. That's good. In a nutshell, FS group. Basically, when you start a pod, you can your pod can or cannot run as root, and you can define it few settings related to the ownership of a file system. So let's say your application is a Node.js or whatever, you run it as the Node user, you will give it through the FS group, through the GUID ownership on your files. The issue was for that customer who was using backend array with NFS. Yeah, important to say NFS is pretty popular because it gives you concurrency for free. So you can have pods spread across different nodes writing on the file system. So yeah, it's popular for that. The issue that customer encountered was that he deployed his pod. He had his FS group defined for whatever reason, for a good reason. Everything goes fine on the first boot, but when the pod dies, it's being rescheduled and so on, it was just crashing the pod and Kubelet was unable to start it. The bottom line is, after opening an issue against Kubernetes, is FS group wasn't designed to handle NFS at all. Another issue I encountered was for a customer who was dealing with media files and has lots of files, and basically when you use FS group and you want that volume, it can be pretty long. And even from the logs of Kubernetes, it tells you, hey, be careful using FS group with multiple too many files can be very slow. So the solutions here for one customer was to patch his application with an init container, and instead of delegating that change ownership and change mode to Kubernetes, was to do it through a custom script, very tiny script, but we had better granularity in defining the rights on the files. The second thing is NFSD3 still rocks. You know, we have NFSD4, which brings lots of security and so on, but in terms of file system ownership, it was much more smoother and faster with NFSD3. The fun fact is we have Kubernetes 120 since a couple of days now, and there have been few improvements, I could say, on that area. The first one is for CSR drivers like us, there is a flag that says if we should or should not honor the FS group, and this has been really designed for NFS. You know, if you're using NFS, you should avoid to use the FS group. The second flag, still a beta feature gate. Basically, when you set the FS group, you can decide to change the ownership on just the first level, the root, instead of going and doing this recursively on all your file systems. So it must save you lots of time, especially when you start a pod with special group. It creates zillion of files because of your database or whatever. You know that it will already have a good group ID. I would have many more stories to tell you about Quark's astonishment with Kubernetes and persistent storage. A few of them are recorded on my blog. I try to share tips and tricks and how to deal with this kind of issues related to multi-networking cluster, to SLNX implementation, to Kubernetes API changing, etc., etc. So maybe I've been a bit pessimistic during that presentation, but I would say that the lessons learned are if you start with stateless app, Kubernetes, it's fairly easy, and I will engage you to, if you have to do migration from legacy application to cloud native type of application, start with the stateless, it's much easier, and deal carefully with the stateful app. The second thing, which I loved about Kubernetes, is it made really I'm saying the monkey patching made easy, in the sense that you don't need to be an hardcore developer on Go or whatever to just like hook a deployment, a stateful set as your labels, create a new init container, a sidecar, and basically patch your application very quickly without going into so much trouble of changing code, basically. And you have the ecosystem is really great about it. You have tons of tools to do this type of monkey patching operation. Also, lesson learned. This Kubernetes is changing every quarter, and you have new features. and some things that were just basically impossible to do a quarter before are now possible. Thinking about my NFS example with FS Group. So I would say if you're dealing with Kubernetes, read the release notes. It's always interesting, and things are changing pretty fast. I think I'm in the timing. So do you have any questions for me about stateful app Kubernetes? You can reach me on the Slack as well, if you will.
Florian, I had one question. You mentioned the pod vents, and yes, it looked like that was for failure recovery. But how is that used along with, I guess, persistent volume claims in the like initialization of a pod?
So basically, when you will have your stateful set defined, you will add a label, an annotation that says, okay, this application uses a CSI driver from Dell. Use the podman. The podman is a sidecar container deployed along with the CSI driver, and it will watch for that application, and it will also watch for the I/O that it uses on the backend array. And when the node goes down, since there is some coordination between the different podman, we know that the node isn't available. We know that there is no IOPS anymore, so it's safe to move that application to another node. And like we reattach the volume and do everything for you. In case that's the opposite, that is to say your node goes unready because you have kubelet failure, no partitioning, but you still have IOPS, then the podman will decide not to do anything, basically stick with the default Kubernetes behavior and let the engineer decide to reschedule it manually or wait until kubelet restarts. Make sense?
Yep. Awesome.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Florian. That was an amazing presentation, and it was really cool. Interactive QR codes. I think I'm going to use that in my next talk. All right. Next up, Layla Sells from Google, engineering manager at Google, and she's going to be talking about advice on being advised navigating your tech career. And she is probably one of the most thoughtful and probably has had one of the most insane career trajectories of anyone I've ever met. So anyway, I'll hand over to Layla and let her share her story and what she wants to talk about.
Well, thank you, Kit. That was certainly a nice little intro, especially you are someone who I also think of who's had an adventurous career path. Kit and I worked together on a team 16 years ago. No, sorry, dating us both. But yeah, thank you, Kit, and perfect breakout session. So you've all sort of been thinking about advice that you've had in the past. And my journey has certainly been a meandering one. And I've also done a ton of mentoring and coaching, and I've managed a bunch of different disciplines within tech over the years. And so one of the things that I've sort of come across as I've been either helping others, but really looking back at my own career, is how important the ability of just like the meta aspect of getting advice. And early on, certainly I was really bad at this. Obviously, you know, I continue to try and improve on that. And some people are just either naturals of it, or they land in these spots where, you know, I worked, one of the things I did for a while was I worked on compilers, and a lot of folks, you know, they have degrees in compiler optimization and they're going to work on compilers their entire career, and they sort of landed where they needed to be. And a lot of us, I think, have more complicated journeys, and on there we end up getting advice, whether we notice that it's advice, whether we've asked for it or not, and that's just part of the journey. So let's dive in. And my first real sort of meta point to the meta talk is that advice is optional. And we sort of, when we're asking for advice, I think we realize that it is, but it's very easy to forget that advice is just somebody else's opinion of what you should be doing. And obviously there's places where it's tactical, like what button should I push? If there's an actual button and you should push it, and that's part of your job, like that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when you have a decision to make for your career, for yourself, for any of these things, and you want other people's input. And then of course, on that, this talk is also advice. And so it's optional. And what I encourage you to do is, instead of looking at the whole thing as, is this a perfect fit for me or not, is really looking for, is there one thing that from today you can take and apply? And even if you get just 1% better at asking for or taking or applying or some piece of it, looking at how that can help you make decisions in your career so that it feels right. Either you're gonna make better decisions or feel better about the ones that you make. Now, as much as it's optional, we're really in an environment where it's not totally optional. The fact that tech changes so quickly has a ton of implications. And in this year, we sort of really are faced with how much change can impact us in every layer of our being and how that happens. But within our industry, even in normal times that feel constant and steady, the tech industry is in its infancy. And many of you in a couple of years might be in roles that don't have titles today or don't exist, or in tech that hasn't been figured out. And not only do you need to learn from others in tech, which for me, that part was always easy, right? Like, oh, well, you're talking about the product or the technology or any of that. But a lot of times, there are only so many career paths that any one person has taken, and those aren't codified. Our industry is just not there, especially for folks who, I'm guessing most of you in the audience are excited about doing things that are in different areas of tech and helping new parts of it that, a few years back wasn't even as important or as much of a focus that's now critical. And so first, just, 10 seconds, think about where you're getting your advice. And so these are just 5 sort of buckets of places where we might get advice from. And the real point of this is to remind you that advice doesn't always look like advice. When a manager is setting expectations or holding accountability, it can very easily sound like, wait, that's not advice, that's not an opinion, that's not optional, because this is my job, I have to do it. But the reality is that you always get to make your choices. And you may not like the consequences of some of them, but ultimately it's your decision. And so if you don't love your job and your manager is setting one expectation, there's the opportunity to leave, or if there's something different that you want to be doing, figure out how to negotiate that. But you're also getting it from mentors who give you information, and opportunity finders and your peers. And sometimes it's just offhand like, oh, this is definitely a thing. And so a lot of times you're going to hear it as facts. And of course, friends and family, whether they're in the industry or not, they may, you may go to them a lot for certain pieces of it. And you end up with a bunch of different people that you can look to for different pieces of advice, or where it may just even come without your intentionality. And that was something that I made a lot of mistakes early on in my career by not really understanding the context of, someone suggesting something, and even knowing whether I could ask or question it. And listening to everybody is overwhelming. And so part of the things is that if you have a bunch of people and no single person has the exact answer to make your decision, it's easy to want to ask a bunch of people and then get pulled in different directions. And when that's the case, it can very much be this piece where you're trying to look at what other people are wanting from you and trying to negotiate that instead of looking at where you really want to be. And then we get to the big thing of like, how do you know what advice to take? And so this one's sort of to you, Kit, but how many of you have either been told, definitely focus on depth, build your technical depth, you have to be an expert in something, or ensure that you have breadth, you have to know lots of things, that's your flexibility. And so sometimes we see these two opposite choices and are really torn between them. And it's like, well, which one's right? And I hope many of you are jumping at, it depends, because that's really the case, that it comes down to the context and the situation, what you want, what jobs you want, what career path, what you need in that moment. And in this case, this may be one where, it's sort of obvious that, comparing two of them, that it depends. But often we'll sort of get these statements from people, or this knowledge and wisdom that comes, and it sounds so right that it's easy to just internalize and take it as a rule. And the reality is that most advice that you're getting, it's not going to be perfect. Even if you have someone who you get great advice from all of the time, or so you think it's all the time, some of it's not going to be ideal or optimized. There's a good chance that if there's someone who you tend to like their advice, they may have a similar background and a similar path. But as things evolve, you may find that maybe you over trust their advice because they're right so often. And then often we don't get really horrible advice, although hopefully some of you had some fun stories and not too awful. And there's folks who, are intentional and you don't want to, and it's a bad situation. But then there's a lot of times where people will give advice and it's just not good advice for you. And the real sweet spot is this middle part where there's some useful parts of it and there's something to learn and there's something to apply, and it's not going to be a perfect fit because you're trying to do something probably different than what they're doing. But on the flip side, what we end up doing sometimes, if we either only get, if we're not having a great experience with the feedback and the advice that we're getting, is that we thrash between these two extremes of either thinking, oh, well, I know how to do what I'm doing, and sort of easing in to this situation where you don't realize that you actually could benefit from external input, where it's just like, oh, I'll figure it out. And often it's this place where sometimes you just don't have the context and someone else could give a lot more thought, but you just haven't taken any in. And you have exhausted sort of your experience, your ideas, that piece of it, to a situation where you feel that you don't know how to proceed. And sometimes this can come from not taking input until the point where you feel like you don't know what to do. And then on the flip side is then looking for people to tell you, what should I do? Should I take this job or should I take that job? Should I do this thing? Should I talk to my boss? And asking other people to sort of decide what you should be doing. And both of these end up having, downsides to them. And whether it's about a delay or it's about having suboptimal decisions because somebody else is making them for you, or really just thrashing between different things. And so this is sort of it's going to happen. There's no perfect with it, but thinking about like, where can you add a little bit of intentionality to sort of get closer into the middle of looking for how can I take some input into my thought process early enough, and then also staying in a place where you still own your decisions. And so when we think about, bad advice, which was, very topical with the question in the middle, it's usually for good reasons. And obviously there are people who, there's a problem in the relationship, or you don't like them, or they're, you think they're the worst manager in the whole wide world, whatever it is. There's some folks who you have no business listening to. They haven't earned sort of being part of deciding your life. But most of the time, the people that you're actually wanting advice from, when they give you bad advice, it's for good reasons, right? If your goals aren't aligned, and if they have if they're scared for you, if they're like, and the reality is that you don't have the same skill set as them. They're going to be places where other people, if you're doing something big, they won't see the whole picture. And convincing them of it doesn't really serve you. There's no need for it. They don't need to be pulled out of their path either. And so looking at, it's a lot of burden to put on the people that you're asking for advice to completely align with you, to give the perfect advice, to get to where you are and do all of that heavy lifting. And so instead, if you can just look at it and understanding that they're going to have sort of their piece of it, and making sure that you're meeting them at least halfway. And you're allowing for that space for them to be imperfect and from their own perspective. And really, when people are giving advice, most of the time, in part because this isn't a skill that is really focused on that much, people are encouraged to do it, but the skill part is that, one, they're either going to look at their past and what's worked for them, or what advice they were given, or they're going to think that something didn't go well in their life and they wish they had done a different thing. So they're going to tell you the thing they wished they had done, which they don't even know if it would have been right. It's just different than the thing that they were told that didn't work. Or they're hearing what you're saying and they're just trying to make you happy. And so they're going to tell you what they think that you want to hear, or what they're sort of piecing together of your story. But there's just not enough time in the day to ever tell anybody enough of your inner workings for them to be able to perfectly make decisions on your behalf. So what can you do? So let's start with a really simple model. So by default, many times, if we even know we're getting advice, we get the advice and then we either do something or we don't do something. And the goal here that I want you to think about when you're about to get advice, or you've just been told something that you're like, that sort of sounds like advice, is looking for how you can just pause for a moment and create some space to really think. And so if we spread those separately and really look at what thought process do we want to put in between the two, and you may come up with your own. All of these are just sort of tools or ways to think about it. But when you get something, really deconstructing it. Get curious about the advice itself. What is the lesson? What is the learning? And so often by the time we get to asking for advice, we're already impatient for the decision. And so being okay with pausing for a moment and really doing the work. And so part of it is that this allows you to benefit from the lesson learned. There's just going to be some things that we're going to have to learn on our own. We can't learn everything from everyone else's learning. And then for the ones where you are, actually learn from it. Look at what pieces you want to apply, what things automatically you're like, oh yeah, that already fits, and think through the why. And if you were going to pick a side, I would say focus more on really getting curious on the advice itself, deconstructing it, understanding it. And then from there, you can incorporate that just as any other just information into the decision that you're making. And so what this is really saying is that listening to advice is not the same as taking it. And that can sound super awkward. I hope that you're not picturing sort of the, that's just like your opinion, man. Because that's not what I'm saying that you should do to people when they give you advice. What I'm saying is set them up so that you're not asking people to make your decisions for you, so that when you're learning from people, you take that burden away from them and really just learn from their experience and separate your decision on how you actually apply any lessons from that. It also opens up the ability to learn from multiple people without feeling like you have to take everything all or nothing. So the biggest way to help do this is to stop shitting yourself. Yes, you like that? Hopefully you'll remember it. And so what I mean is this place where it's like, oh, I should do this, I should do that. Or asking other people, should I do this, should I that? And really getting to a place where you're asking more meaningful questions. And so this is just a short list of ones that you can ask, but that get you out of that awkward situation of asking someone, what should I do? And then inevitably, they're not going to have the perfect answer. And it's super weird when you don't then follow up with it. And so learning about what the person has done in a similar situations, really asking about the learning, the why, the what they figured out, different approaches. One that I love is just asking for the criteria, looking for what context is missing. And anytime that you can just pivot any of the questions into questions that are more about getting to the real piece that you're looking for, that you're trying to learn about, it automatically relieves them from any feeling that they're supposed to make a decision for you, and just allows them to share what they know and what they have. And you're going to get more richness out of it as well. And then, of course, the other thing is you're going to have another decision on the flip side and the flip side of that. And if the advice that you ask is what to do each time, you're not actually going to get any better at, learning from these various places. And so here's one other just little tool in how to prepare ahead of time. And so super simple, you can add to this, but if just before you actually reach out, just clarify to yourself, what is my goal? And this could be at this point, what decision you're actively trying to make and looking at that piece of it. But then the next piece is make sure you identify what you already know. Because this comes back to when you ask advice and then someone tells you to do something, you're like, oh, well, no, I already tried that. Just avoid that by really getting clear with yourself. What do you already know? What part are you blocked? What do you really want to learn? And then if you can actually get to the place where you're granular enough to know what you want to learn and you know who you want to learn each thing from, then you can have a really clean conversation with people and figure out what the piece is. Plus, when you show up, the quality of your questions are going to be that much stronger. And in some cases, just this exercise ends up working in a way where you end up sometimes unblocking yourself. So sort of rubber ducking it through this piece of it as well. And I realized I did not have a timer, so I may have gone fast. I'm either right on time or really quick. But so the main thing coming back to this across the whole talk is getting to a place where you really think about advice as information and looking at each place of how can you just put yourself in a position where you know that you're able to make your own decisions and separating it and looking at what information do you need to feed into that instead of the reverse. And then I'll give you my favorite advice that I tell often, which is just the quote, which is to go as far as you can see. And when you get there, you will be able to see further. And I think this is a piece where so often we have these options and we don't know the future. We don't know what the right answer is. And there isn't a perfect right answer. And going out and asking 5 people or 100 people isn't going to magically make them have the answer for you. And maybe in certain cases there are, but most of the time it comes down to a place of figuring out what you need to be able to take that next step and to go to that next piece that you know. And so with that, I hope that you look at your advice really as a piece of how to help you on your journey and choosing your own adventure with the help and support of all of those around you. I don't know what time I started.
You were perfectly on time, Layla.
Excellent.
Right on time. So you're going to stick around for a few minutes here. I'm going to do some other content and we'll come back and do Q&A. How's that sound? Is that cool?
That's great.
All right. Thank you so much. Everybody just needs like a moment to process that, right? It's like very, very deep. Hang on a second. All right. I'm going to do my wrap up and then we'll get into Q&A. Share my screen again. Okay, cool. All right, so next meetup in the new year. This was officially the last meetup of 2020. I know it seems crazy. 2020 is almost over. And we have another great speaker. Really excited about this one. I think it's pronounced Latanya Ferreira from Rollbar, really cool company. And will be great to have her there. We're still looking for a second speaker. So if you know anybody, you know who to tell Urza. And that'll be January 13th. We'll get another coffee meetup on the books, but at some point in probably late January, this will be the next event will be this one. Okay. So make sure you go RSVP. Urza is going to send you the link. Come and check that one out. Oops, I'm skipping over that. Okay.
Latanya is correct, by the way, Kit.
Oh, thank you for
Nailed
the
it.
pronunciation check. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll do it again for recording. Latanya Ferreira from Rollbar. There you go. All right. The other thing I'm going to request, and we take it really seriously, is your feedback. We like to share it. There's a quick survey. I promise you it will take you about a minute or two to fill it out. We really do take it seriously. The reason why this event is so tight and awesome, as you can tell, is because of the feedback from all the participants. And also there's an opportunity for you, if you brought a friend or came with a friend, sign up to get a official Seattle SRE, Beyond Seattle SRE mug with a QR code you can use to RSVP to these events in the future. And it says, I don't know if you've seen it, but it says sip, relax, enjoy, like this. So it's really cool, and you can be one of the cool kids with it. Survey will take just a minute. Urza, send it out. Yeah, cool. That's all I have for my final announcements. Did I miss anything? Anything anybody want to shout out? Anything else going on in SRE land? All right, we're going to go back to Q&A. So this is the part where we do Q&A. And normally we would have a panel, but I guess it's just Layla. So were there any questions for Layla?
I have one. Oh, go ahead.
Go for it, Jesse. I'll go next.
Well, first, I just want to say that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for putting that together and delivering it. On your matrix, sort of the pre-work for seeking advice, I've run into situations where I don't know who to go ask, or if I need to go to like a library or a university or just Google something. Like, if you could just spend a couple minutes just talking about, you know, if you're taking a shot in the dark and looking for advice and you don't know who to go to.
Yeah, so with that, I see a lot of people in their first like mentoring as well, where this is super common, where it's like, I don't even know what to ask or who to ask. And so I think part of it is even just writing down the like, I want to learn how to learn this thing. Who can I find that can tell me how to start? That's your goal. Where do I start on this topic? And you may think through it and it's like, okay, what am I blocked on? I don't even know the search terms. So maybe you do some of that. And so you can really start that very, very early on. And so this idea, I think it's very easy for us to say, I don't know. And the second you say, I don't know, it's sort of your brain sort of retreats. But if you can put yourself in a perspective of like, I'm figuring something out, or asking yourself a question, suddenly at least your mind will start looking for the answers. And so looking for the simplest one. And so sometimes it's like, okay, who do I know that I just am fine looking like an idiot in front of? And it's like, this is just going to be one of those dumb questions. And so I have a couple people who I'm like, okay, like here's the best friend, and I'm just talk through it. And then at least if they don't know either, then it's like, okay, this is really like a thing. How do we look for it? You can brainstorm with it. And like, maybe this is some really unique question. And sometimes it's just getting to that piece of like, oh, well, here's this one person. And here's this thing to ask about. Or you start sort of putting it on. It's like, or maybe the thing is, I need to get connected with someone who knows about X, Y, Z. And so I think even starting with that little bit of context changes it from, I have what sounds like a simple question, which is so much better than like, I'm clueless, I have no idea what to do about anything. Help.
Yeah, I hear you there on that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a good one. Everyone has that question starting out.
Yeah.
Or at random times. Yeah.
Layla, I was just going to bring up, you talked about taking advice from people that you might have, you know, more of an affinity with or a similar career path. Do you have favorite advice you've received from somebody with maybe a field or a background you weren't expecting that wound up working really well? And what do you have favorite advice to give? I'm assuming your favorite advice would have been in the talk, but.
Well, I have a lot of little soapboxes that I get on with advice. So for someone who's like, oh, you know, don't ask for other people to tell you what to do, I have a lot of opinions. But I actually have gotten to the place where I think that it's helpful to have at least, like at a minimum, if you're at a stage where you're wanting mentorship, I think it's good to have someone who you can really relate with and someone with a very different background or experience or trajectory. You just learn very different things. And sometimes there's a piece where, because of, like sometimes there's certain things where, reality is that like there are certain approaches where as a woman, like it doesn't work super well for me. And so I can get certain advice, and I've gotten it where I just look back and I'm like, that would be a disaster if I tried that. The other person's like, really? And think about it, it's like, oh, okay. And then, so it's nice sometimes for certain things. And then I also think that you really risk narrowing your window if you're only learning from people who you feel like, oh, I'm going to be like them, or they're a lot like me. Because we're all different. And so we may have like some obvious places where there's some similarities, and then a bunch where you don't really understand, or like maybe you want to grow in very different ways. And so I actually went through a bunch of like the back and forth, and my background was all over the place. And so having that, I think, is really helpful. I actually intentionally try and match up people with sort of different things that they're trying to learn for that piece. And it's sort of like you can learn the most from someone very different and different experience if either you are good at learning from them or they are good at framing and sharing things contextually, and telling their stories and what they've learned and all of that, as opposed to just sort of dictating things. And then sometimes, there can be certain topics where it isn't relatable. So I think it's good to have a mix of folks that you learn from informally, formally. Not everything has to be a, official thing. Sometimes it's just a like, hey, I noticed that like you've done this type of thing, or it looks like you're really good at this thing, and I'm trying to do this thing. Can I ask you a couple questions about, this decision or this experience? I don't know if that's sort of off topic, but.
No, awesome. Thank you.
Others?
Do you have
Actually, Florian, you're still here. I just realized. Florian, are you still there? I kind of assumed you were gone. You're still here. We can't hear you though. I think you're on mute.
Yes.
There you are. Ah, good. Okay. Well, if anybody has questions for either Florian or Layla at this point, feel free to jump in on those. I know Tim has one.
Can always come up with a question. But this is for Layla. This isn't necessarily on the advice and how to take it itself. But one of the things you mentioned, or sorry, while you were talking about while you were showing the slide, in fact, that showed this sort of framework for getting from advice to action or inaction. First of all, thank you for the framework. I'm going to steal that and use it.
Yeah.
But sometimes I've caught myself in a situation where there's a need to make a decision in a more timely fashion versus a more sound decision. The framework you said, the framework you showed us there looked to me like it was an excellent way of interpreting advice in the context of making a sound decision. Any advice for how to recognize the difference between a decision or an action or an inaction that needs to be taken with a lot of advice or without a lot of advice?
Yeah, so and I think there's sort of a two-part. First, at first, going from like, whoa, how do I want to take this into information? How does it apply? What am I bringing to it? It can be clunky at first, but it doesn't actually have to take a lot more time. Realistically, I think it takes more time trying to get advice and take it, because it's never really fits and you have all this drama about it and it's messy and you take it and then it doesn't work, or there's all this weird stuff. And so actually just jumping from information, decision, or action can end up being a lot slower. So it's not necessarily faster once you've sort of internalized and sort of made that little tweak. The other thing is you can sort of like I'm a big fan of 1% improvements over time, because it's really easy. Like if you just took an extra, 3 minutes each time you got advice, or 30 seconds to sort of think through and see if there's anything that you want to do, or an extra few minutes asking, like clarifying how you ask the question, and, make sure that it's not, hey, which should I do, but asking for something like that, asking for information more directly of what you actually need an answer to. That can actually save you some time, but there's sort of the picking which things work for you. You don't have to do it all at once. Pick a little bit of it. So it's not really a time thing where it feels like, oh, either I'm going to do all this heavy work and make a good decision, or like just the faster. And then separately, I think that there's a place where it varies a little bit based on how much advice you like to do and how formal versus informal. Sometimes, like at Google, at least, we're very chat heavy instead of just through email or long meetings and stuff like that. So I have places where I might just send a ping to someone and be like, hey, I'm about to do this thing. I wanted to check on this. Like, what did you think of this? And so depending on how important it is and how easily changeable later is a huge part of it, right? If it's just, hey, there's a decision I need to make it, either way, I can recover from it and it's not some big problem, great, make the decision. Especially, sometimes you spot check advice, it isn't perfect, it's okay, you can move forward with it. And so similar to the risk pieces of it. But when you're getting into this place, and I often find that it's way easier to sort of make these decisions about sort of product and direction and which technology, this and that, and it can get into sort of a debate, but it feels safe to ask those questions. But when you're thinking about like, should I change jobs? Should I make this call? Should I do this instead? Should I reorg my team during a pandemic? Which, by the way, I did do. I had advice not to, and I was like, no, this is definitely happening. So there's a bunch of those things where the more like critical it is, the more you care about it, the less you can change it later, the more I care about like really feeling good about my decision. And it doesn't have to take longer. And so it's just a matter of like, how much work ahead of time are you doing to make sure that you really know where you're at with things and what information you need from the advice. So I don't know, it still depends.
So Layla, you said something there that led me to another question, which is, I think sometimes it can feel awkward to get advice and decide that you don't want to heed that advice for whatever reason. And so just wondering if you had a couple of ideas about how to respond. I mean, because you don't want to burn a bridge, right? And so what would you say, what do you do when you decide somebody's giving you advice, but you're not going to take it?
Yeah, so first, it's always easier to set it up clear beforehand, so that whether they give you advice that you would never take in a million years, or you're going to do the exact thing they say, that you set it up in a place where you are making a decision and you're looking for certain information about how to think. And so you're looking for, how are they thinking through a problem? Sure, give me your number. So there is a piece where like some of it, and sometimes, it is your mom or whoever it is, where the conversation is just like, that's part of the relationship that you can sort of figure out, or separately, we can talk about sort of some boundary setting and some different things on that if that topic wants to come up too. But so like one, just like getting to the place where you're not like, what should I do? Every time I ask someone that, I immediately am like, oh, I wish I hadn't asked that. And then, if you do, and they say, oh, here's the thing that you could do, instead of trying to justify your other thing or saying that piece of it, one way is to look at something and just say, acknowledge their perspective. You can talk about, oh, this is really interesting. Like, I don't know if it applies directly, but this really helps me think through some of the pieces I hadn't thought about. Right? So how can you respect their time, respect what they gave you, and acknowledge the part that you are going to use from it? And so maybe it's a piece where it's like, hey, really talking through this is really an obvious step. And the fact that my reaction was to think that there was this other piece. You helped me really uncover that I do care about this other thing. So this was really a helpful exercise, even though I think I'm doing this other thing. So there's places to, I think, just acknowledge and build in that transparency and sort of just gently sort of reposition that, like, well, this is your life. These are decisions that you're making. This is the career thing. And you still respect what they did, and they didn't have to be perfect, right? Because anyone who took the time to give you advice, they're trying to help you. And, you know, if you can just make it so that whether they gave advice that you're taking or not, that it was helpful and that their time was useful and that the relationship is better for it instead of harmed for it, then, like, you know, if they're not good with it at that point, then, you know, next time,
I might not ask for their advice again. Yeah. Thanks, Layla.
Anyone else? Other questions? We got time. Don't be afraid. It's a safe group.
I have a question for Florian since he's still here. I always have questions. Do you have Florian, do you have a good example or a cookbook for a stateful Kubernetes app? Because I've judiciously avoided creating any stateful systems that would run on Kubernetes, but I would imagine the only place that's jumping to mind right now is like if I were implementing a database cluster of my own that ran on Kubernetes or something like that. But what is a good common stateful app that people build that needs to be run on Kubernetes?
So me, I'm mostly involved into migration project of legacy apps to kind of cloud native. So Redis is very popular. It works super well with our Podman because, you know, it's in memory, small databases, and I see lots of PostgreSQL, but it's more for migration of existing type of application. We don't really have cookbook. I've seen lots of mchart prepackaged by Bitnami. So, you know, they do a great job about pre-configuring all the settings. So you have a secure database with replication, everything enabled, and you just have to fine tune it. So I would say if you have to start with a project, yeah, go check out the end packages from Bitnami.
You know, another cool project is the YouTube database thing from Planet Scale, which its name is escaping me.
Yugabyte?
No, the other one. Shoot, Vitesse, which works with Kubernetes pretty well and lets you do a Postgres on Kubernetes, but it might be more advanced than deploying Redis. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else? Everyone's muted. Well, I want to thank all the speakers, both the speakers, and always thank you, Urza, for organizing all the logistics and everything. So thank you. And she's doing it from Sweden. So thank you for staying up late for us as well. And I also saw some people filled out the survey already, so please take a second to do that, and we'll send you your mug, and we'll see you in Slack. We'll see you next year. Have a great Christmas and holidays of whatever you celebrate, and thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. This was super fun.
That's a wrap.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Forward to next time.
All right.